Good morning and welcome to the Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center seminar that we're having today. My name is Charles Barkov. I'm a policy analyst at the Baltic Sea Center. I'll be moderating today. I usually explain what I do to people who ask that, well, I've spent this past 6 years trying to understand fisheries policy, how the decisions are made, why the interplay between science and politics, and I'm still working on it. And so I'm really glad to have two people here today who've recently published articles about different aspects of fisheries policy. One about largely decentralized management of the European eel under the framework of the eel regulation from 2007, and the other a more centralized management of the cod, sprat, and herring under the specific, in particular under the Baltic Sea map from multi-annual plan from 2016. Of course, the fisheries management has not been really successful. The fish stocks are not in good shape. There are, of course, environmental drivers, but also fisheries management plays a big role in that. This is also very timely because the Swedish government will be presenting its new draft eels management plan on the 1st of October. And they will submit that to the government, and what happens then, nobody seems to know. And later on in October, the EU ministers will get together and decide on next year's fishing opportunities, where a real issue this year will be how do they look at risk? Enough from me. I'm going to turn the floor over now to Henrik Svedäng, and correct me if I'm wrong, senior scientist, associate professor at Stockholm University and Gothenburg University. Marine fisheries biologist.
Yes.
And you wrote your first article on eels almost 30 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, but let's hear about the new one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Yes, let's go on. About failed fisheries management in the Baltic Sea, the European eel case. This is short recapture of the complicated biology of European eel. It spawns in the Svedäng Sea. Eggs and larvae drift towards the European continent and North Africa. When it comes to the coast, it turns into be yellow eel. It metamorphosizes into a growth phase, which is called yellow eel, and it stays in coastal water and inland waters for 5 to 30 years, and then return to the Sargasso Sea to spawn as a silver eel, and eventually die. The first alarm concerning the development of the European eel was actually from Sweden by Gunnar Svärdson, a fishery biologist, and he noticed that there were fewer eels, yellow eels migrating up in some rivers, both on the west and east coast of Sweden, and poorer catches of silver eel, especially in the Baltic, and eels that were leaving the Baltic for the Sargasso Sea. I did a follow-up 20 years later, and the decline continued, both concerning the ascending eels in rivers and the catch of silver eels in two trap nets, big fishing nets in the sound. Today, the recruitment has declined even further, both regarding glass eels entering mostly estuaries and rivers. So it's a bit biased estimate, one could say, because the marine waters are not covered so extensively. Also yellow eel. But what is really missing here is the return migration. How much eels are actually returning back to spawn, and that is the only way of actually evaluate the efficiency of different protection measures. And due to the decline of the eel stocks, as Charles mentioned, the European Commission asked member states to develop their own management plans. And the Swedish one, I just pointed two of the actions. One was to ban the fishery totally on yellow eel on the west coast, and limiting the entrance of new fishers into the fishery on the east coast. And that fishery has traditionally been targeting migratory silver eels, maybe not anymore. What I have done here is to use international fishery independent trawl surveys that are conducted both in the North Sea and region and in the Baltic region. And they are designed to measure demersal fish stocks, such as cod and haddock and whiting, but they also have a low representation of, but still measurable representation of eel. And as far as I know, it has not been used before to assess the abundance of larger eels. And this is a map showing the amount of hauls done in the first quarter and fourth quarter in the Baltic region. And the blue dots is hauls without eel catches, and the red ones are with eels. And with proper statistics, it is possible to evaluate the development of eels in different trawl surveys. This is the IBTS covering North Sea and the Skagerrak and Kattegat in the first quarter and third quarter, and 3 surveys that also could be used mostly in the North Sea. And the results, the upper panel on the left is just showing the amount of eels landed in the Swedish Baltic fishery, eel fishery. And the other ones are the different trawl surveys. And what we can conclude that is a sharp decreases in eel quantity in all of them except one, in the IBTS quarter 1, which is conducted during winter, and eel is not very active during winter. It is an accentuated decrease since 2010, and the eel management plan was implemented at that time, so it doesn't look very successful concerning the eel management plan, in other words. What has been a bit more encouraging is the development of the inshore areas on the Swedish west coast. Here is how the fish stock looked back in the 1990s. I did a study on eel catches in the eel fishery, and it is very much shaped by fisheries at that time. Hardly any eels left above 50 centimeters. Today, monitoring fishing shows an increase since 2010 in larger size intervals, while below the catch limit 37 centimeters, there is no increase in recruitment as far as can be told from these monitoring fishings. All right. So the increased ban the ban has increased the production of larger sized yellow eels, And the decline of the stock is related to fishing in this area as well as the solution. If we look at the landings of eels on the Swedish Baltic coast since 1925, Sweden was one dominant eel fishing nation. There is a continuous decline since the 60s, and the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management, the National Board of Fisheries nowadays, so to speak, they say that the regulation has been effective in the Baltic because the landings of silver eels has declined. But a more easy explanation is that the decline is related to fewer silver eels. There have been suggested that there are still a massive number of eels in the Baltic Sea. How it was possible? It is based on marker capture experiments made by SLU, the Swedish University for Agriculture, that due to the low reported recaptures, only 0.3% of the stock, there are thousands of tons of eel in the Baltic Sea. Modestly told, we are told that only about 4,000 tons is probable in the Baltic Sea, and that figure has circulated since 2012, I think. However, facts are speaking against such a conclusion. Recruitment is very low. Production of silver eels has probably decreased as a consequence of that. The taken methods depends on the willingness of fishermen to report recapture. It's a fishery-dependent method. It should be abundant because it doesn't work if the recapture rate is only 0.3%. And fishery-independent trawl surveys, as in this study, indicate, on the contrary, a sharp decline in production of large eels. Given what we know, the marker capture method seems to be very flawed. In conclusion, fishery-independent international trawl surveys show a sharp decline in the abundance of larger eels in recent decades. European eel is threatened more today than it was when the management plan was introduced. Coastal stocks of yellow eel can produce more large eels if they are protected. We have to deal with what we still have in our waters. The recruitment coming to the European continent should be managed better, because that's the only resource we have concerning eel. All eels are wild. We can't reproduce them artificially. We are totally dependent on the natural production of eels. Lower eel catches on the east coast is likely due to lower abundance of large eels and not fewer fishes. And scientific work on development of eel stock needs further review. And I stop there.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Henrik. What would as I understand, your findings are more or less in line with what ICES has been saying for a number of years, or?
Yes, it is, but there have been a lack of information concerning larger eels in the sea. Measuring eels in lakes and rivers are all many times influenced by stockings, but eels have been translocated into rivers and lakes, and therefore it's not informative. So this is a kind of new information, but we are not preserving what we have got in our waters, especially in coastal waters.
So ICES, which is the International Council for Exploration of the Sea, they've been suggesting for a number of years that or estimating that the fisheries on eels are all human-induced. Mortality on eels has to stop. And your findings don't go in a different direction from that, I gather.
No, of course not. It should really, the politicians are in charge here, and they are responsible, and they should stop eel fishing altogether, as the ICS are telling them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Have you gotten any response to your article that was published in Frontiers in Fish Science, as I understand? Yeah. Have you gotten any response from other scientists who've used different methods?
Not up to now. No.
Not yet. Okay, so we'll have to keep our eyes open on Frontiers in Fish Science.
Yes.
To see about the continued discussion there. Thanks an awful lot. I got a bit stressed out because I had a technical issue, and I forgot to say in the beginning that people who are watching this online can ask questions, send in, I hope, via Slido. That should be on the screen. Yes, it is. And also via email. And the address for the email questions is... Centrum@su.se, and that should also be on the screen. Okay, and the questions, we will also hopefully have time for questions here. And the questions that we don't have a chance to answer, we will try and answer afterwards online. So keep an eye open there. Now it's time for Eva Papiano to come here. And Eva is a scientist at the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, in marine evolutionary ecology.
Correct.
Is your specialty, yeah, and a co-author of a very recently published study in Science that has gotten a lot of attention. I know it was discussed in the European Parliament at a seminar a couple of weeks ago with one of your colleagues was there, and we're very happy to have you here. Also because if we're going to solve the problems in the Baltic Sea, then we need international cooperation. We need a discussion across the national borders. So we use the English as the lingua franca in the Baltic region. Thanks a lot for coming here.
And thank you very much for the kind invitation. And I'm very happy to see so many people attending this event. I think Henrik already made a very good case of a failed fisheries management model regarding Kiel, but it is not that different also regarding other areas, and in particular my focal area. This is the Western Baltic Sea, and other fish species, and in particular major commercial fish species, such as cod in the Western Baltic, that has been a staple fish in the area. And I think that this can actually be demonstrated if, similar to what Henrik did with the analysis of catch data, for instance, for the eels, what you actually notice here is the trends in the catch. Here, for instance, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, yes, from the early 2000s to more recent years. And you can see that, for instance, for cod, herring, and sprat, red, light, and dark green respectively, we see a very steep decline in trends. The same also accounts for the flatfish species, such as plaice, flounder, and dab, although in scientific surveys you do observe their numbers increasing. And I think this also demonstrates that these fish species cannot really replace the key commercial fish species, such as cod, herring, and sprat in the ecosystem, but also in the fishery. And I think that this trends the decimation, because today's catches actually amount to less than 10% of what the situation was in the early 2000s, is a clear indication of the failure of implementation of policy, because actually there are ambitious policy targets in place, you know, stopping overfishing and having sustainable fish stocks by 2020. This was a key provision of the CFP, but we can see that this hasn't been the case. And I think before investigating what that is, perhaps a small overview of how total allowable catches are actually set in the case of Northern European waters and for key commercial fish species would be helpful. We start at the lower level by the collection of different types of data that come directly from the fishery, and data that come from scientific surveys that the National Fisheries Institutes in the different member states along the Baltic coast collect and compile in respective databases. Then this information is fed into the ICES, the International Council of the Exploration of the Sea, as Charles mentioned earlier, who use the various data sources and feed into their models in order to have forecasts for the following years that are fed into what is requested to them by the different European Union institutions, and they produce a catch advice for the respective stocks, so cod, herring, and sprat, for instance, and this is provided to the European Commission, that comes up with a catch proposal, also taking into consideration the advice from other regional advisory bodies, and they come up with a catch proposal that is then provided to the European Council. This is the Council of Agricultural Ministers along the Baltic member states, who come up with the total allowable catches, how much of each stocks can be taken up. And you can see that this might actually end up, we termed this process an overfishing ratchet, exactly because it can end up, as I will demonstrate in the following example, by the forecasts, what was actually forecasted as a biomass, inflated in each different level of the management and the quota setting step. And this is precisely the case of the Western Baltic cod stock. What has happened in the past, and like inspired by some Australian colleagues in relatively recent papers who came up with the idea of the phantom recovery. So biomass estimates of what actually was there that are very optimistic and lead to wrong predictions. And we actually assessed the respective advice that had historically happened from the early 2000s to today. And we saw that recently this has also been the case regarding the Western Baltic cod stock, with some really prominent phantom recoveries, like over predictions of the biomass that respectively led to inflated ICES advice, and then the subsequent TAC advice, and ultimately the setting of the stocks at levels much higher than they were. And this was retrospectively corrected. You can see here the dark blue line, which actually is the observed biomass, stock biomass. And this, you can see that it is substantially differs from the respective projected biomass forecasts. And another interesting observation is that there were situations where the observed biomass could exhibit, let's say, some increases, and this would have been an opportunity to rebuild the stock with a 1-year reduction in catch if, you know, this idea was followed. But precisely because the biomass predictions were wrong, this never happened actually. And according to the ICES system of thinking, how it basically works is a maximum of 21 to 24% of the fish that currently is in the water can be sustainably fished per year. And by going back and deducing from the observed biomass, so from the latest and best available science, so to speak, the respective catch, you can see how much of the maximum sustainable catch could have been caught based on the biomass that was actually available at the time. But, however, what actually happened was exactly because the biomass predictions at this time, so these light blue circles were much inflated and constituted phantom recoveries in the past. The respective ICES advice, so this purple line here, was actually much higher and sometimes like 50 to 200% above the actual maximum sustainable catch that could have been caught and should have been caught in the respective years. This was further increased in the context of the European Union Commission that proposed tax, so the black circles that you can see here, higher than the ICES advice until 2014, considerably higher than the respective ICES advice, and most recently a bit closer to the ICES advice, precisely because the state of the stocks was in an unquestionable anymore, let's say, bad state. But in all cases, both the ICES advice and the UE proposal were far above the maximum catch that the system could actually support both for short-term and longer-term sustainability. And this was further, of course, propagated in the context of the EU Council of Ministers, setting of the tax quota, who, based on the EU Commission proposal, but also taking into consideration their national advisors and other input to the process, typically slightly exceeded the respective EU COM advice. And this is what we meant also by this overfishing ratchet. I hope it now becomes a bit clear in the process. And in each case, this was substantially higher than the maximum sustainable catch, what the system could actually support. And with this, I also wanted to mention here, with this red line, I think this is a very interesting and intriguing point. This is what was actually taken by the fishery. So this is the catch. And you can see that the catch, what the fishery actually took from the stock, was lower than the spawning stock biomass. So the fishers, of course, they cannot catch and the respective total allowable catch in the context of the tax. They didn't actually catch as much as they were allowed, exactly because they cannot catch more than the system can support. So I think this also demonstrates that it isn't, the fishers themselves that are the villains in the story. And I think that this is an important take-home message also to that thing. And I think that you can see that the total allowable catch, like the dotted red line, in the most recent years is coming much closer to the biomass that is there. And I think that if this happened in a much earlier time point back in the past, this simple retrospective analysis could actually enable the managers to make much more informed and scientifically sound decisions. And with that in mind, what can be done, I think that if we do continue with the business as usual of overfishing the stocks, then we are talking about a complete stock collapse. So it is important to stop all remaining fishing for Western Baltic and Central and Western herring, Western Baltic herring and Central Baltic cod stocks and herring stocks. And in the occasion of a good year crisis, it is important not to put excessive fishing in these year classes, but to actually let them grow, reproduce, and rebuild stocks. And afterwards, a true ecosystem-based fisheries management, the implementation of key principles of ecosystem-based fisheries management, so setting thresholds of exploitation of stocks in much more conservative levels in order to prevent these things from happening in the past should be implemented. And at the same time, fishers are victims of this mismanagement process, and I think that in the occasion of a closure of the fishery of cod and herring to this, they should be compensated for not fishing for the few remaining cod and herring. Another idea that we set forward was perhaps like a suggestion of developing a new politically independent institution, precisely because short-sighted national interests have really compromised, let's say, the current management institution. And this would be tasked with setting ecosystem-based fisheries management advice, and the Commission and the Council would then formally have to restrain themselves for not proposing tax and setting tax above the new scientific advice. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I am very thankful, of course, to my co-authors, and especially Rainer Fröse, who was the lead author of the study, but also to the funding agency within the context of which happened the particular research. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eva. And I guess we can stop this somehow. But I have a couple of questions first. Well, in the meantime, and that is, as I understand, since 2017, the Commission proposal and the Council decisions have been following the scientific advice more closely, or the forecasts actually made by ICES about what could be a sustainable catch in some narrow sense. But that hasn't been enough. And as you describe it, there seems to be, do I understand correct that there's can be like a structural bias towards an overestimation?
It is indeed, yes.
In the fisheries assessments. Okay.
And another issue is like also they do follow the ICES advice, but there are some derogations, for instance, for instance, that there is a reduction in the quotas for herring and sprat, but at the same time there are some exemptions, let's say, regarding this. Yes.
Right. Okay. So when a stock falls below a certain level, then there's the exemptions, say, for bycatch in fisheries and other things.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me see if I had another question here. I asked Henrik if he'd gotten a response from the people who did calculations in a different way, and have you gotten a response from ICES?
Yes, yes, we did, and it was in the context. You are also very welcome to see it. It is in the context of a e-letter directly below the science publication. I think that this is also a very constructive way of discussing, let's say, these things openly, and and I think that the critique was primarily, to my understanding, let's say the main topic was the impacts, other impacts, such as that also have to do with the bad state of the stocks in the Baltic, and mostly environmental and climatic impacts, and how these impact the stocks, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And to which we also wrote a reply, saying that exactly because those are important, of course, like impacts to consider, like the role of hypoxic or anoxic conditions, or due to overfertilization and eutrophication, or warming waters due to climate change. This makes the need for ecosystem-based fisheries management and a more conservative approach to fishing even more evident, I think, yes. And to that end, exactly because the bad state of the stock and will be exacerbated, let's say, due to these things, there is a need to lower fishing even more, in a sense, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And Henrik, can you come back? Because I have some questions for both of you, and then I'll open up the floor for others here. And I mean, obviously, it's notoriously difficult to estimate how much fish there is. And you should, I guess we should all stand closer to each other. Yeah, okay. So it's notoriously difficult to estimate how much fish there is. And you have to do like really creative things for the eels, I guess, different methods that come to different results. Do you think that there has been enough clarity from the scientific community about the uncertainties?
Well, regarding eel, I think so, at least on the international level.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Good. And Eva?
I think this is also what we aim to do in the science paper also, to say perhaps how these assessments could be a bit, could become a bit better, like how, you know, more conservative thresholds could be established and so on and so forth.
Okay, so then the next question up the food chain is, do you think that there's been enough appreciation on the part of the managers and the politicians about the uncertainties in the scientific advice?
Well, generally speaking, I don't think so. I think much more emphasis should be put on the uncertainty in fish stock assessment in general, yes.
And Eva?
Yes, I do agree. I think that sometimes also scientists, also within the ice community, perhaps, let's say, might, you know, mention these uncertainties, but this is, I think, not given the appropriate focus that it should have. Yes.
And a consequence of that is I guess, that we're taking bigger risks than maybe we realized in management.
Yes, absolutely. Different levels of different kinds of uncertainty, I would say. It's both concerning observations, but there is it will always be an uncertainty concerning how much we fish in relation to the stock, but also concerning what is the sustainable level. So, in order to not overshooting the maximum yield, you should always keeping the fishing pressure below that, and over time, I guess it's more. It's a more healthy way of managing fish stocks.
And with the, excuse me?
Charles, can I take an uncertainty question from the
Okay,
online
yeah.
audience?
Okay, good.
It's to
Yeah,
Henrik.
to follow up on that.
So, for the silver eel surveys, given the current very low probability of capture, is there not too much uncertainty to make conclusions on the current trend?
No, it is not. Given the statistical methods I have used, so it's a clear decline over time. Yes.
Okay, so another point that we talked about was regionalization. That there's been a discourse that like there's too much. A problem is too much steering from Brussels, and so if things were decentralized, then it would be managed better on a regional level. And the eels has been managed largely by management plans. The Baltic has, since 2017, more on a regional level. Has that worked? Has it delivered has it been enough?
You first.
Do you want to elaborate a bit to see if I understand correctly the question? Sorry.
Okay, yeah. In the reform of the Common Fisheries Policy in 2013, the regions were given more power to decide about not only catch levels, but also other conservation, conservation measures. And it was hoped that this would lead to better management and better results.
Like do we mean,
Yeah.
I don't see it being so, yes, I think, I don't see it being so efficient, let's say, yes. I think that it is also, my understanding of how you mean it perhaps, it is also that it is, the contribution, for instance, of regional advisory bodies is also like within the process of the tax setting, and they also, are compromised, I think, their role in the tax process, I think, yes.
Okay. We have another question here.
Yeah, thank you. Christian from Low Impact Fisheries Europe. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I speak very clear. Thank you for two very interesting presentations. I mean, you're picking up a lot of what the coastal fishery has been critical about. We call this, scientifically driven overfishing. A lot of our stocks, which we're dependent on, scientific advice has been completely wrong, using bad data, bad modeling, and then producing bad results. At the same time, slightly concerned that you seem to both be kind of consensus towards more ecosystem-based management. I'm wondering, is the data is really poor quality, and you talk about uncertainty being an issue, but how is adding even more uncertain data points? Is that really the way to go? And then just a couple of questions of something I know very little about. I've heard, the theory of fractals, where you're using all these probability and multiplications, and as you add more and more uncertain data points, you get further and further away, and you have this theory of fractals. And then also complex systems theory. I know nothing about this, but if you know anything about that, could be maybe a way to go. Thank you.
Neither do I, but well, concerning eel, there is no uncertainty in the advice. It should be no fishing on neither on any life stages. But generally speaking, yes, ecosystem-based management turns out in the end to lower fishing effort. That's what happens.
Okay. And can someone explain what is ecosystem-based fisheries management in 30 seconds?
Well, it's taking into account that animals in the sea tend to eat each other, and stocks are divided into subpopulations, for instance,
Okay.
and things like that.
We actually, it was an interesting topic of a consideration also in the framework of our paper. I think 4 easy principles, The first is that abundance of fish stocks should be such so to maintain, fundamental ecological processes. And I think with that you can, and this is like the predator and prey role, let's say, of the stocks. And with that you can also deduce how many can be taken, the respective biomass levels that can be taken for this role not to be compromised. The second is that the age and size structures should be such indicative of a healthy population, and this means you don't fish for babies, and you don't fish in important essential fish habitats, let's say, in nursery areas, for instance. The third is, of course, that you need to minimize the environmental impacts of fishing, both in the food webs, exactly like Henrik said, but also for instance, habitats or the seabed. And the fourth is that you need to designate no-take areas and marine protected areas where fish can find their refuges, in a sense. Yes.
Okay, so as an answer to Christian's question, it seems like you're saying that We don't have enough scientific knowledge to do this sort of ecological fine-tuning, if I can borrow a term from economics that's been discarded a long time ago. But there are some sort of rough and ready rules of the thumb that could be used more efficiently. Okay, we've run out of time. Just very quickly, a last sort of standard question that we usually ask. If you were able to decide one decision that you think that the politicians would make, what would it be? Henrik?
Stop eel fishing.
Oh, okay, and Eva?
Same for cod and herring in the Western Baltic, yes.
Okay, thanks an awful lot. And that sort of is is all that we have time for today. Those of you who are here, you can ask questions of Eva and Henrik, I think, afterwards. For the rest of you, we'll try and answer them on our website. We'll be meeting again here on the 22nd of October. Exactly what we're going to be talking about, we haven't really decided yet, except that it will almost certainly not be directly about fisheries, but probably in something that in some way can impact on fish stock development also. Thanks a lot for today. Bye.